Then when I was birthday party when I was 10, my friend fell asleep and got one of those thick Sharpies, drew all over their face.
What we're talking about in class is how cool it is to draw on your friends with permanent markers like Sharpies. Friends. This is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Monday, the 14th of March, 2022. And you have presumably turned in your Chapter 8 chapter surveys, and we have just done Chapter Survey Quiz 8, the Baker Quiz 8. And now we are going back into the Pax Romana, as you can see on the notes. So, we have talked about the emperors of the Pax Romana, from Nerva to Commodus, and then we talked about the transitional period through the Civil War and Septimus Severus through Alexander Severus. Now, let's look at geography. So we're on item B, as in Bravo 3, Geography, of section 15, the 4 eras of Roman imperial history. So section 15, B, Pax Romana, 3, Geography. By this point, the seeds that Augustus and the Republic planted are coming to fruition. And Rome is merely the first among several equals. For example, Alexandria is huge and cosmopolitan. It's actually, in some ways, a bigger center than Rome itself. Not politically, but economically and culturally. Alexandria has a large Jewish population, a large Greek population, obviously Egyptians, Roman, people from all over the known world. And Alexandria is a center of intellectual life. Ooh, what's this? It's plastic.
Eat it. Eat it.
You want to do that, Dan?
Not really.
Don't suggest it to others, then.
Give it to a turtle.
If it can talk to a turtle.
Yeah,
That's the idea.
Animal cruelty is the first sign that you'll become a psychopathic killer. So don't be cruel to animals. It's a turtle. Because they perceive time so slowly. Okay. So what this means is that Rome may be the political capital when the emperor is there. But for example, when Marcus Aurelius is north on the Marcomanni frontier, Rome is not that important. The city of Rome is simply one of many imperial cities. Now, there is a connection to the modern day. Up until the 1960s or 70s, American companies were American. You had people like Andrew Carnegie, who founds Carnegie Steel in the 1800s. And a lot of progressive historians called Carnegie and Rockefeller of Standard Oil robber barons, because they set up these massive monopoly companies that dominate their entire industry. Standard Oil dominates the oil industry. Andrew Carnegie and Carnegie Steel dominates the steel industry. But these so-called robber barons were Americans. Andrew Carnegie spends ridiculous amounts of money building libraries across the United States, in most cities and towns. He didn't have to do that. He did it because he's an American. He saw himself as an American. And this is true of Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company. Ford, like most American companies, again, before the 1970s, saw itself as benefiting from the American system. So Ford would give back through massive charitable donations. The same is true for a lot. But in the 1970s, 60s and 70s and 80s, American companies began being dominated by people who thought of themselves as citizens of the world. And these citizens of the world started moving factories off the shores of the United States because American labor had become too expensive. But they were citizens of the world, and their companies were international now. They had to answer to an international group of stockholders, not just a bunch of Americans. What has this left us with? It's left us with an economy that's hollowed out. that does not have a proper industrial base, where we depend upon our enemies, like China, for essential goods. And a bunch of companies who think that international standards, which are much more authoritarian than American standards, should be the way things work. Not that that'll ever come back to bite us in the backside. No, we're citizens of the world. It's like schools. When I was looking for work as a teacher, I loved walking into schools that talked about, in their mission and vision statement, which they had all over the place, educating global citizens. And I didn't get jobs at most places because I said, what's a global citizen? I'm educating American citizens. I don't mind American citizens understanding the rest of the world, but there's no such thing as a global citizen. There is such a thing as an American citizen. And if you make people more global-oriented than American-oriented, they're not going to necessarily understand what that flag uniquely represents and why the United States has been the chief destination of ambitious people around the world for centuries. Because we offer something that the European system does not. Social mobility based on merit. Rome was important. Not anymore. It's still, a capital, sure, but it's not anything special anymore. The other cities of the empire have grown up to compete with it. So, the peculiarities and particularities of Rome, its republic, and everything else begins to be de-emphasized. Romans soon begin to be treated like everyone else in the empire, which means they're no longer treated like the conquerors that they were. They're treated like everybody else, because everybody's a Roman citizen. Remember Caracalla and his making everyone a Roman citizen who's not a slave. Now, by this point, borders are stabilized, rationalized, and defended. The last real expansionist emperor is Trajan, and he's very early in this period of adoptive emperors. He conquers the triangle between the Upper Rhine and Danube. He conquers Dacia, and he conquers Mesopotamia. Well, Mesopotamia is immediately evacuated by Hadrian, his successor. Dacia is kept. It's there for about 150 years, but it's one of the first provinces to go to the barbarians, long before Rome falls. And the triangle in the Upper Rhine and Danube region also goes to the barbarians pretty early. For the most part, Hadrian stabilizes the borders. And what Marcus Aurelius is fighting for is not to conquer Germania from the south. It's to prevent the Germans from posing a plausible threat to Roman territory. In other words, Rome is no longer fighting to conquer. Rome is fighting to hold, to defend. And that's a different attitude. When you're fighting to conquer, you're a predator. You're looking for opportunities. You're a hunter, looking for prey, looking for weakness to exploit, to attack, to consume. But somebody who's fighting on the defense, they're just looking to hold on. They're just looking to survive. It's a more herbivorous rather than carnivorous mindset. I'm assuming that whatever it is, dealt with. There are many Roman colony cities that continue to be built by veterans. But many of those early cities have matured into real urban centers for their area, and Romanization is proceeding apace. Now, military grand strategy remains the same. Even though Rome is now strategically on the defense, tactically, Rome still goes out and fights in other people's land. This is key. So long as the Romans view their borders as jumping off points from which to do their patrols, from which to attack the enemy, Rome is going to be able to protect itself just fine. It's only in later periods where the Romans view the border as a thing to hunker behind, to hide behind, that Rome is going to lose the initiative. Strategically, Rome is now on the defense. That is grand scale approach to imperial survival. The strategy up to this point had been occasional conquests. It is now strategically on the defense. But tactically, that's how you win battles, not wars. Tactically, Rome continues to be aggressive and to use the system of forward defense that we talked about last time. Rome continues to use professional soldiers, just like we had talked about last time. So that remains the same. Economics. The currency is stable. Now, one of Rome's problems is that since the time of Gaius Marius, there haven't been new strikes of gold and silver of any significant size. That means that the amount of coin in the Roman world is relatively stable and has been for hundreds of years. So it's the same gold that continues to be recast into new coins again and again and again. The same gold, the same silver, the same basic amount of gold, the same basic amount of silver. So the currency is remarkably stable, but it's a little stagnant. Without new sources of wealth, the Romans end up fighting over the amount of wealth that there already is. It's sort of a zero-sum game. Whereas what we like to do is we like to prospect and find new sources of wealth. Whether it's new mineral sources or new products or whatever. Widespread peace and civilian lifestyles are considered normal. There is something that is built during the Pax Romana that is uniquely a sign of progress. We're surrounded by them. It's called suburbs. Suburbs, urban sprawl, is when people no longer want to live within the constraints of city walls because it's constraining. Every inch of space matters inside city walls. So even a small place of your own costs huge amounts of money. On the other hand, if you build outside the walls, because you don't need them anymore, because the military system keeps the peace, and there aren't huge numbers of brigands within the empire and invasions from outside the empire, there's no reason not to. Look at Americans today. How many of you live behind a plausible wall? I'm not talking about a 5-foot plastic fence. Anyone who's serious can get through that without wasting too much time. Dogs can jump over it. I know, I used to have one in my backyard, a plastic fence. And I liked the neighbor's dogs when he came over. The neighbor was embarrassed. That was his problem. Because the dogs went right over. We don't live behind walls. In fact, in America, we haven't lived behind walls since the Indian Wars. And even then, most of us didn't live behind walls. We just fortified our homes. Today, you fire a rifle bullet, it'll go straight through a house that's made of modern materials. I've got walls made of pressboard, particle board. I've got nothing to stop a bullet except me. Really? Modern homes are not designed to stop a bullet. Back in the 1800s, when farmers built a house out of logs, they wanted to stop bullets because the Indians had bullets. And they knew they'd be fighting possibly at some point from their homes. They had shutters that were like medieval castle shutters. They had little slits that you could shoot through. So, suburbs, building out so that you can have some space, a yard of your own, a house of your own, is a sign of incredible wealth. It's like type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, which I have, is a sign of wealth. Because it comes from eating a rich diet and not exercising enough. I, throughout my life, have been blessed by enough food to eat a very rich diet. And as a consequence, because I don't enjoy exercise and I do enjoy eating rich food, I gave myself type 2 diabetes. This is the way most people get it in our society. It's not type 1 diabetes, which is much more serious, but it's still pretty serious. It's a sign of wealth. You want to talk about optimism about the state of affairs in the world today? This is before 2020. before COVID and before the Russian invasion and so forth. But what doctors were preparing for in the third world was a massive outbreak of type 2 diabetes, which was an indication that most doctors around the world were thinking that the food problems that have been chronic in the former colonial regions of the world of Africa, Asia, Latin America are in the process of being solved, and that you'll, like in the United States and like in Europe, you'll have lots of people who have access to more than enough food for the first time, and rich food at that, and that type 2 diabetes will increase in those portions, those parts of the world. That's a very optimistic outlook. Now, suburbs are not a disease. Just to be clear, they're wonderful. You get the best of city life, you're close enough to do stuff, but you get the best of country life. You have your space. You're not living on top of one another in an apartment building like the old Romans used to, and they're insulated. So suburbs, you should note this, are a sign of incredible wealth and peace, are a sign of incredible peace and prosperity. Suburbs are a sign of incredible peace and prosperity. And the Romans have had incredible peace and prosperity for so long without foreign invasion, they've begun to think of it as normal. Normal! It's normal to be peaceful and prosperous. But they think it is. Just like we do. Long distance and empire-wide trade become the norm. It's normal to grow olives in Phoenicia and transport them to Britain. It's normal to dig tin in Britain and ship it to Phoenicia. Now that had been done in the past, but now it's part of the same empire. And being part of the same empire, the trade increases to everyone's benefit. But it's during the Pax Romana, the Chinese records speak of an expedition from the far west, from a ruler named Antun. Antun's representatives go to the Chinese Empire. Antun is clearly Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius. Antun, Antoninus. And the Chinese describe Romans. So Romans go along the Silk Road, which is basically from the Middle East, through Central Asia to China, over the north of the Himalayas, and they get to China. That's incredible. China is incredibly far away when you're talking about walking there, walking across Eurasia, but some Romans do it, and they come back to tell the tale. There are a few Han Chinese coins found in Roman caches from this period. There are a few Roman coins found in Chinese caches. Now, we're not talking routine trade, but we're talking Marco Polo-style visits. That's incredible.
I love Marco Polo.
It's a fun game. Yeah, well, that's a problem anytime you play with your eyes closed. By the way, don't ever do this if you're a babysitter. Get your kids out into the backyard, have them spin around and close their eyes, spin around, and then have them run as fast as they can in a straight line.
Oh my god.
Is there a glass table?
It's evil. No, you don't need to put anything in the way. Sooner or later, they're going to hit something. Maybe they'll hit each other if you place them properly. That's evil. Don't do that. Yes.
Playing Marco Polo?
Yeah.
It's fun until you're like waiting, and then all of a sudden, like, there's a certain spot in my grandparents' school where it just drops off instead of just going.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Down, so he's like, well, okay, you think you're on one of the cool, and then you have to drop off and you just go
off.
Well, that's a different kind of fun. When we played Marco Polo, we didn't walk, we swam. We would go up Marco Polo, and then you'd set to swim and catch. Because swimming is faster than walking. Maybe we just did it differently. Maybe it's East Coast, West Coast thing. I don't know.
It's fun until you like slam your hand into a brick wall.
Yeah. Or into somebody's face.
Yeah.
No! Ow! Sorry!
No. That's the goal.
Yeah, so says the guy who talks about the joys of writing on people with Sharpies. Okay.
Yeah.
Roman versions of suburbs are built and become widespread. Now, religious and social. Increasing numbers of Romans give up their traditional faith for mystery cults. So, yeah, the Olympian gods are still worshipped, yada, yada, yada. They still have gladiator games dedicated to them, but it's for show. Honestly, how many of you think about the pledge? When I was a student, occasionally I did because I was of a historical, sort of frame of mind, and I knew veterans and all that. I would tell you that most people don't. If they do the pledge normally, most people don't.
My dad, when I was younger, because we said it every day, he was a Marine, so he's like, every time to make it mean something, think of someone fought for the country that you're grateful for, in the past, in the present, someone you know personally or not. Just think of someone or something that.
That's a great way to do it. That I try to do that, some version of that. I try to think of the sacrifices made in the name of that flag. You know that people have died to keep that flag from going into the dirt and the mud. This is true in every army because the flag is somewhat sacred. This comes from the old Roman imperial eagles that were considered gods of the legion. So if you're like in the American Civil War, even Spanish-American War, the World Wars, if you're carrying a flag and somebody shoots you, you are not to seek cover. You are to keep those colors off the ground. And it's not, to me, the flag represents the Constitution, but it also represents that thing that people think are more important than another day, their lives. Most people don't think of that. Most people just go through the motions. We used to say the pledge in Maine. We actually didn't say it at all when I started there. And I finally, one of the changes I made in my old school was we said the pledge once a week. That was the compromise. We wouldn't say it every day. We'd say it once a week. And it was special. The kids who wanted to say the pledge took it. And the kids who didn't want to say the pledge, it was once a week. It was not a big deal. I like saying it every day. We used to start school with not only the pledge, but a moment of silence, which took the place of a prayer. I like the idea of a school prayer, sort of a non-denominational, helped me to be a good person today. But okay, fine, the Supreme Court finally decided, that's not constitutional. So having a moment of silence was what we did. Silent meditation or prayer is what we called it, where you thought about the day and thought about things. And just having a minute of silence, you may not think a minute's a long time. If you're sitting there silently and you're not thinking about something, a minute can be a really long time. It's like being underwater. It's a long time. So, in any case, the patriotic gods were things that most people, not everyone, but most people went through the motions about. Instead, the cults of Mithra and of Isis and of these others continued to grow. And Christianity began rapidly expanding in the cities and in the Greek East. By the time of the Pax Romana, pretty much every province had Christians in it. Every city and town had at least a small Christian community. That's why, for example, when I saw the movie Gladiator, it irritated me because they didn't show any Christians at all. And there would have been at least somebody that was a Christian somewhere in that story. There were just too many Christians in the empire by this point. So Christianity is spreading along with the mystery cults. And it's stronger in the east than in the west. It's stronger in the cities than in the country. Now, occasionally the empire persecutes Christians, but it's not a big deal yet. Imperial persecutions of Christianity have not become something significant. And the aristocracy is a mix of Italians, Spanish, Greek, and other heritages. That's a big deal. Back in the Principate, the leaders of the empire were all Italians. But now we've got emperors from Roman colonists from Spain. We've got emperors from Carthage. Yeah, we have Carthaginian emperors. Emperors who share the bloodline of Hannibal rather than Scipio. We've got emperors from Syria who are Arabs. We've got emperors and aristocrats from all over the empire. And this is going to make a big difference. Again, Rome is not so important as it used to be. We've got time to start this. So, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have no idea what I'm even thinking of.
Nope.
But
Yeah, that's.
what we're doing is we're going to look at gladiator games as an example of something that the Roman emperors do for their people. It's called bread and circuses. What the Roman emperors... Dan, that's broken.
Yeah, I
Don't do
realized
that one. You can close it, though, by using the plastic thing. And that would be nice. I'd appreciate that. Unless that's broken, too. No, it's not good. Thank you. No, I appreciate you trying. I really do.
Thank you.
I don't appreciate you failing, but I do appreciate you trying. Okay. We're going to take a look at some scenes of gladiatorial combat. And that will continue into next time. So, see ya.